coming up.
There needs to be proper education, which there isn't. There hasn't been. Coaches have just got to be, now today, have got to be more aware of things than they ever were.
The pressure, but it's another thing to actually sort of go up and actually say to a parent or go up and actually say to them, I think you're being a bit too harsh on them. The coach or the educator is happy with the results or how they're progressing, then I think that's really all that should really matter. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Kieran. Today I'm going to be sitting down, just like this entire podcast series, I'll be sitting down with a wide variety of people where I'll be talking to them and having interesting conversations with them about life and different ways to grow and learn and develop, whether that be business-wise, financially, spiritually, emotionally, any different spiritual, religious, and just any form of way of growth. And honestly, if I find the conversation to be interesting, and if I can find a way to learn something from it, that is the main part of it. So today is my first guest. Today's guest with me is Jerome Buck, someone who I've known for going on nearly 10 years now, or going close to 10 years. Jerome, how are you, mate?
I'm good, mate. Has it really been 10 years, has it?
It'll be 10 years in 2025. So, yes.
Well, yeah, that'd be about right, because it's about 10 years. It's the 10-year anniversary of that premiership in 2015 that I had with Manly when I was living over there, that I coached Manly in. So, yeah, that'd be about right. 10 years. Yeah, so...
How time flies there, Jerome. How time flies.
It does. It certainly does that.
One thing there to what I am going to be doing, as I'm going to allow my guests to just sort of give a brief 1-minute quick introduction about themselves, and then I've also got a question there from what my previous guest has to ask you, and then after that we can then get straight into the podcast a bit. So you can go and the floor's yours to just say a brief intro about yourself.
Obviously, my name's Jerome. Jerome, I've been involved and grew up and lived in Wanneroo, which was, as I say, is north of a suburb north of Perth now. Virtually a real suburb north of Perth. Probably the last suburb north of Perth when I grew up there. It's not now. It's been swallowed by the rest of the metropolitan area to the north of it. Back then, it wasn't. It was the suburb furthest north of the city within the metro area. It was the last stop on the buses back then. We didn't have trains at that stage. We only had the bus, and that used to be a regular thing for me with Mum when I was younger. I used to go and get on the bus and go into Perth. I remember those trips, and I also remember not a heck of a lot between Wanneroo and I think the next area of suburb was more Greenwood or areas like that, if people know what Perth is. So that shows you how long ago we're talking. We're talking the 80s there. So I grew up in Perth in the 1980s, and I got involved and played junior cricket, and then I got involved with my coaching. I started a journey as a coach. Really, as a coach was largely because I wanted to go on a journey as a teacher, so I started a journey as a coach, and that's taken me pretty much all over the world not all over the world, but all over Australia, and certainly to New Zealand since then. I've been involved in various things over the time, mainly two sports, mainly hockey and cricket, but I've been involved in some other stuff as well. It's been a heck of a journey so far. It's not over yet, of course. But yeah, so that's pretty much my background. It's been involved with sport for well over 30 odd years, and done a fair bit in that area.
Yeah, well, you have had a very good career so far. And my question to you, which is from Chris. So, Chris, at the end of the podcast last episode, once gave me a question to ask my next guest, and you'll get a chance to ask the next guest a question as well. And the question is, imagine that this was your last day and you're on your deathbed. What would you do on your last day?
Well, I had a bit of a think about this one, and the answer I pretty much gave is or thought about was that you'd want to make sure that you need to say the things you need to say to the people you need to say it. You need to make sure there's no loose ends. You've done everything you want to do. That's what I'd be out to do. I'd be making sure that everything that needs to be said, everything that needs to be done is done. And I'm ready to move on to whatever comes next. After that, as I say, when you get to that point in life, and it comes for everybody eventually, you just can't afford to have regrets, and that's first and foremost what I'd be making sure. I'd say to the people I want to say to what I want to say, and then that's basically it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do agree with that. I think you do see a lot of people saying to themselves, "Oh, I wish I had a chance to say to a loved one before they passed that I love them," or something, or or even for those there that have passed, them actually. I mean, the people that are left behind, just sort of wondering, did they know that you love them, or did they feel the same way about you and all that there. So I do agree with letting people know that by showing appreciation, but also just letting them know that that you do love them and whatnot, and not take them for granted.
I think that's important to remember. And my own experiences in this was that when my nana on my mum's side, my grandma passed away, was the chance to say goodbye to them properly, and to say what needed to be said. And in the case of my late grandma on my dad's side, I certainly got the chance. I did that. I was able to do that. Luckily enough, I recall now. I actually think it was when I came. I think it was when I came back from Sydney, from memory. The first time that time. So that, we are looking back then. I had a chance to say, to say goodbye. In fact, I said my chance to say goodbye. Actually, it's quite funny. I saw her in the hospital. I said, "See you later," and I went off to Bustleton at the time to run a camp, hockey camp. And I received a phone call while I was in Bustleton. I think on the first night, to say that she'd passed.
Oh wow!
I was grateful of the chance to say "see you later," because while I was away in Sydney, obviously Grandma deteriorated. Yep. Things had changed. When I left to go to Sydney, Grandma was still, still living at home, still, still quite that way. When I came back, of course, it was very different. So that tells you what a year can do.
Yeah, that's true. A year can definitely make a difference. I mean, you see people, being fit as a fiddle, and then 12 months later, I mean, you find out the worst has happened or something.
Oh, look, so that's what I say. You want to make sure you say what needs to be said. And I think when you get to that point in your life, like I say, it comes to everybody eventually. So one thing that does is a certainty. It's the one thing that is a certainty in life, is death, as they say.
That's true.
You want to be certain that you've said what needed to be said, you've done what needs to be done. Because whether you believe in whatever, reincarnation or whatever the business, and I don't pretend for 1 minute that I do, you don't get a second crack at it. So, you've got to make sure everything you wanted to do is done.
I do agree with that there, mate. We all have our own religious beliefs, but we have one life here right now. What happens in the next life, that can wait until the next life, but we just have to make sure that, we live our best life, kind of like what Chris said in the last episode. We got to live our best life, and also make sure that the people there that, that we spend time with and that we love, we make sure that we do tell them.
Chris is right in what he says. Death is a certainty. Death is going to eventually come to you somewhere along the line. It comes to us all. It's no point getting hung up on it. It's no point worrying about it. It's not something you can control.
That's true.
When you pop your clogs or step off the mortal coil, as they say, it's going to happen. So I certainly don't get hung up on it. It's not something I get hung up on. Obviously you want to make sure that everything that you is in place, so that if any, you don't leave family, or you don't leave friends, or you don't leave whoever holding the bag, as they say.
Or to make them, leave or to leave them wondering, and all that there. So I definitely do agree, and that was also a very good question there for Chris. So I'll wait till the end to ask you your question for the next guest. Back when we first met, which was getting close to nearly 10 years now, you said you have been coaching for God since you were in your teenage years. There, Jerome, and whatnot. You've been coaching for a long, long time. Obviously, as you were saying there, in the 80s, it was around the 80s and whatnot. So multiple generations,
I didn't start coaching in the 80s, mate.
Or the 90s, sorry.
I grew up in the 80s.
Sorry, grew up in the 80s. You grew up in the 80s.
The 90s was when I started to coach.
The 90s. So you've been coaching for multiple generations, from the 90s all the way through to now, and there has been a lot of development. Obviously.
Yeah. God, yeah.
Like we now have, we now have, like electric cars. We now have like a lot more high-end tech computers. We have things like artificial intelligence. We have like a lot more technical developments, but also things like social media as well, which do I think have can have a detrimental effect. I mean, even though it does connect a lot of people, it can also have a detrimental effect. But from a coach's perspective, from a coaching point of view, from back from when you started coaching in the 90s, back from when you were coaching in the 90s, to or even from when you were playing sport in around the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, and whatnot, to even to now, what do you think has been a little bit different in the play? I mean, like both in the coaching, but also in the players' I won't say mentality, but the way as to how sport is also gone about, especially at a grassroots level.
Well, it's interesting to talk about that. When I first started out coaching, the only bit of I started coaching what would have been around 93, 94 cricket season. That would have been roughly around when it began. And it started as an assistant coach. I was in high school. I think from recollection, the only thing that had appeared at that point in time was MySpace.
Yep.
As a social media thing, and it really wasn't a huge thing, actually, to be honest with you. No one really knew much about that at the time. It was different back then. If you had to deal with someone, you had to deal with them by ringing them. You had to deal with them by speaking to them directly. That was one thing. And that sometimes often helped in terms of parental engagement, because if the parent was upset at something you'd done or something that happened, because they had to go through this long process to get in touch, they had to pick up the phone and ring. Sometimes by the time they got to that point, the anger had gone out of their system and they didn't, they had a reasonable conversation with you. From a player point of view, obviously you didn't have the glare of social media hanging over the player's head. You didn't have all of that. So it was, I wouldn't say it was an more innocent time, but I would say it was more of a period where, when I first started out, where it was more about engaging. It was more, you didn't need you didn't have technology, so you had to do it in other ways. So you had to engage. Face to face a lot, which was important. I think today there's a danger and there's a risk that coaches have where they perhaps don't engage enough face to face. I think the technology's probably done a bit of a problem in that. I think the other thing social media has done, and it did start to do it probably a few years in when I was coaching, is it's put the coach under the glare of the public, particularly a professional coach, if you're talking AFL. To put them under the glare of the public almost 24/7, whereas they weren't back then. They could just get on and do their job. I could get on and do my job as a coach. So technology's been good for coaching. It's been good for players in some ways, but it's also been an albatross around the neck in others. And I think social media is where the albatross around the neck's been. In terms of its use, in terms of identifying technique flaws, et cetera, it's been very good for that.
Yep.
That's not social media. That's more the other side of it, the tech. That tech was always there. You go back in the 90s when I first started as coaching, they were using video cameras. They were using that sort of stuff.
Oh, yeah, of course.
But the computer programs that they used cost a lot of money back then. You couldn't just go and download an app onto your phone and away you went.
I don't think apps weren't even invented by then, Jerome.
No, smartphones. You had what they virtually refer to today as dumb phones.
Yes, but just from
when we were growing up, most of us were excited about the fact that we could get a mobile phone and play Snake on it.
Yeah. I mean, I still used to actually play Snake back when I was a kid on my mum's phone.
That tells you the change. When I first started, I'll make this interesting point. When I first started coaching junior cricket, the most exciting thing that junior cricketers who I coached, and I actually did as well, we were most excited about packs of cricket cards and exchanging them. We had files. I had a file full of cricket cards from the year in question, and that was the most exciting thing we did.
So just to lead that back into the way of technology, but also obviously in this time here now, obviously like the way as to how you coach today obviously would have been a lot different back to the way as to how back from when you first started coaching or even into the early 2000s. What do you think are some of the things there that you would have had to, I mean, like, what are some of the things there that you have to sort of look at sort of now and then just sort of be like, look at it now and then, look at it now, but you didn't actually sort of even think, and you're just like going, oh, I didn't even have to think about that there 20 years ago. Because I mean, like, obviously like there are times, because we are heading into tougher times, like things like cost of living are going up. We're also heading into, also with like technology and how everyone's always connected, and how there's also things, such as like cyberbullying and all that sort of stuff there, and the rise of mental health, particularly in the youth of people. You probably wouldn't have thought of those back in the early 2000s or whatnot. So compared to now. How has the coaching, especially at a grassroots landscape, sort of changed?
Well, back then, when I first started, a coach was a coach. A coach was essentially the coach, the person who coached the kids during the week on one night a week, and then on the weekends at a game. And a club was a club. It was a sports club. You signed up to play cricket for your local cricket club, etc. It was part of the community, but that's essentially what it was. Now they've got more of a responsibility. Mm-hmm. You got more responsibilities that come with it. You need to be able to, spot, as a coach today, you need to be able to spot issues with your players that you probably wouldn't necessarily have seen when I first started. From the point of view of bullying has always existed. It doesn't matter whether in what form, it's always existed. The difference being, of course, is that you didn't have the cyberbullying, you didn't have the online stuff to worry about back then. So if bullying was occurring, it was generally occurring. You could see it because it was generally occurring in front of you. So it was a lot easier to sort of identify and deal with. But as it's gone along, obviously that's changed. You now have differences, and the thing is too is that because you didn't have social media, your players were connecting by coming to training, so they weren't often connecting when they were away from the training track. What social media has done, particularly through Facebook, is it's meant that those connections continue off the track, and that they've also allowed for bullying to occur, which you cannot see. Whereas back then, it was. Sorry about that.
No, you're right, mate.
I knew that was coming. I couldn't stop it. And it's not to say you could. It's not to say that bullying back then you could see it all the time. No, sometimes it was hard to see, and it's often hard to see. But the difference is that it's become a lot harder to see because of social media. Those sort of issues. Mental health issues existed back then too. The difference being is I think we were a society that didn't put as much pressure on young kids as we do today. There's too much pressure on young kids today, far, far too much. Even back to when I was growing up, far too much. The difference is astronomically different. And society is to blame for that. Society is firmly to blame for that. No one else. Society, we're all part of that. So that's changed. The pressure, the expectations. You've always had difficult parents. You've always had, there's a term I use today for them, helicopter parents. I just refer to them as difficult parents. You've always had that. You'll never not have that. The difference being is, of course, from today to back then, is that when we had a difficult parent back then, they had to confront you face to face. Now they can confront you through social media and you don't have the face to face. It's a lot harder to call them out. It's a lot harder to, if someone had to look in the eye back then and say something, they had to be, they had to be sure of their facts. Now they can say what they want and not really be sure of anything backs it up, and others will believe them. So that's a big change. It's adjusted the way coaches, particularly coaches of grassroots sport. It's adjusted the way that they engage with their players. It's adjusted the way they engage with their parents. It's adjusted the way they engage with officials, with club, etc. Back then, that wasn't the case. If I regularly attended coaches meetings for the club. I regularly go along to meetings with all the coaches of the club. That was our whether it be weekly or fortnightly, we'd sit down and have a chat. Now, you don't do that. You probably do it all over social media. So that shows you the difference.
So let me ask this here. I mean, because you said there that it's a society as a bit of a whole. I'm not going to ask how do we change it? I'm not going to ask that. I'm not going to ask that sort of question. But I do think that but I do agree that that things face to face were a lot more easier. Like got you got to get your facts right. You've got to get everything there almost spot on before confronting the person. But it also gives the person, sort of like the coach, a little bit more of the know as well. Whereas also with social media, obviously it connects everyone. But I think that it also does disconnect everyone as well. So actually, you know what? I will actually ask, how do you think, like, especially like with the clubs going forward, and also with community grassroots coaches, how do they make a bit of change, or how do they help in this instance? Because we are obviously mental health has always been around, and as you sort of said, but we're now more aware of it. Technology is now increasing at an astronomical rate, to the point where, to be honest, we're now potentially going to be now having artificial intelligence, which is now going to be skyrocketing, or could potentially help grow us even more. But also there are other real world other aspects as well. Like the cost of living. Because like things like costing. I mean, like to buy for like take cricket gear, like you have to pay cricket rego, then you then have to buy a bat, have to buy gloves, have to buy pads, have to buy all the cricket gear, and it does all add up and whatnot, which then puts a bit of financial strain on potential families and whatnot. So how does a club and how does a coach sort of be aware of all these problems and know all these sorts of things here from their players and all that sort of stuff there, and is there any way that they can sort of, provide help or stuff there to their players going forward, or families?
Yeah, look, one thing I will say, there's been a lot of conversation around social media and around social media with our kids recently here in Australia. The genie's out of the bottle. We can't put it back in.
Yep. I do agree with that.
This business of banning social media for under 16s and all that. The genie's out of the bottle. We can't put it back in. It's not going to work.
Yep.
What you need to do, and this is important, what you actually need to do is educate. Mm-hmm. And that means is at primary school, at high school, you need to educate.
Yep.
I think you'll remember, Kieran, you may remember this, when we first turned up at ACPE, we had a lady come and chat to us. I think she was from the Australian Federal Police.
Yes, I remember that.
We're all in the big hall, and she turned around and said, 90% of you, and she was talking about all of us, 90% of you have got suspect content on your social media. Now, she was allowed to do that check by the college. I remember that class, that group, looking around at each other rather go, oh, geez, hello, what do we got here?
Yep, I think I remember that as well, definitely.
In stunning shock. So that's education. There needs to be proper education, which there isn't. There hasn't been. Social media came in, and of course, like anything that's new, what tends to happen? It comes in and it runs away from you, everybody. And then all of a sudden they go, oh, hang on, we might need to regulate this.
Yep.
And it's too late. So from a coaching point of view, coaches have just got to be, now today, have got to be more aware of things than they ever were. They've got to be probably, and this has been an argument I've had for a while, coaches, it's more than about just simply going and getting a coaching accreditation for your sport. There needs to be other aspects within that. For example, I believe all coaches should have to go through some form of social media training, some form of understanding of what's going on. I think they should have to do mental health training on a regular basis. They should be taught how to spot and how to identify problems that occur. I've had it happen to me twice. I've had two players under my charge who both had, as it turns out, eating disorders. I, luckily enough, knew what I was looking at and was able to spot it. The interesting point is, and this is a point that I think I've made to the politicians, particularly about this, is that what they don't realise is it's the coach often who will identify these problems first. It's this person that they go to, for example, whether it's a coach of sport, whether they go to whatever. Reason being is because they're not spending every single day with this person. They're only going once a week maybe for training and then again. So that person will see changes that occur. In the two cases that I had, I could see evidence of changes with those two kids. I could see it.
And you could also sort of say as well there, Jerome, I mean, because you've also got a teacher, because you wanted to be a teacher, I think I remember you saying there that you've also got a teaching degree and whatnot there. I think also teachers are also able to spot it as well because...
they can do because they're not with the kids 24/7. They can do, but some cases also they can't.
Exactly. So I do believe that with the education that you are correct there, that we need to find ways to educate people in regards to mental health, but and to try and find ways to get people to sort of want to speak up and talk and whatnot. But I do think that it is also very, very hard, and I think also that especially when it comes to like getting into not wanting to go too far into this part of the conversation, but just wanting to know there's a fine line of sort of knowing too much or not, or being intrusive and wanting to help. If you sort of catch my drift.
There is a fine line. See, the other thing I think society's got to do, and I think this is something that I've been advocating for, and I'm advocating for very strongly, is that we have to turn the pressure down.
Yep, I do agree with that. I think that pressure is too high up on everyone.
We put too much pressure on young kids. I don't like the term. There's terms that are getting used around certain things at the moment called school refusal. Don't like that term. I don't know who invented the term, but whoever invented the term needs to be ignored. I don't like the term. I think it's a bad term. It puts negative context on it straight away. And it's not unusual for kids to not want to go to school.
Yep.
The pandemic didn't cause this to start. It was already existed before. What we've got today was already existed before the pandemic. What the pandemic did was brought it to the surface and sped it up. That's what the pandemic did. Brought it to the surface and sped it up.
You just had people just wanting to just skip school. You just had kids skipping school rather than just logging on during COVID and then just not bother doing much of the work then.
What the problems we are facing today, whether it be with anxiety in kids, whether it be whatever, we're already there. As I said to you, I had the experience of two young players. Both of them had eating disorders. That's mental health. And That was before the pandemic. That was before then. I've had horror stories of kids that the club failed to see or the coach failed to see and the kid committed suicide. I've had it. And that was before the pandemic. Before the pandemic. So the pandemic isn't the cause of this. Mm. The pandemic just happened to be the thing that came along that sped this up and brought it up to the surface. Unfortunately, there are some people out there today that want to use the pandemic as an excuse. They want to use it as an excuse, as a thing to blame for why. It's got nothing to do with it. It's that old adage of a dog has four legs, therefore my cat has four legs, so my cat must be a dog. So that's what they're saying. Oh, well, the pandemic, they're looking at data and saying, oh, well, more kids seem to be, so the pandemic must, no. The pandemic just happened to be the thing that, that brought it to the surface and, as I say, brought it to the surface and sped it up. So we've got to turn the pressure down. How do we turn the pressure down? Well, for example, we use sport to help turn the pressure down. We stop putting astronomical expectations on young kids to achieve in sport. Now, I've talked about this at length. I have serious concerns about the fact that we, in profession, particularly in AFL, whether it be AFL, whether NRL, anyone, a kid gets on the talent pathway in sport, say at about, they get identified, say when they're around 11, 12, they go on the elite pathway. Everything becomes about that. They don't have a life. They're insulated. There's a reason why, and this is the point I want to make. I believe there's a certain correlation here. When you see a young player get drafted into the AFL who then has problems, and we've seen it, for every one success, there's at least another 9 that don't. It's not to do with the fact that they're drafted at 18 by the AFL. That's not what it is. It's to do with the fact that they've been put on this elite talent pathway from such an early age that they've never had a childhood. They've never had their teenage years. You and I had our teenage years.
Yeah, that's true. The rebellious years. I mean, it's almost like, I mean, I think I remember hearing a quote where someone just sort of says that if they mature at a very young age, that they would almost, when they go into adulthood, that they would sort of age down almost, sort of. I can't remember who said it, but like if you try and act very mature from like and not let your hair down at such a very young age or and whatnot, as you get older, you start to, obviously be a bit resentful, but you want to try and act out a little bit and try and get back the youth that you sort of missed out on.
Yeah, because they didn't have that experience when they were younger. They've been insulated.
Yep.
Often, in most cases, whether it be in AFL, whether it even be in my sport of hockey, they become insulated and isolated from. What happens is that they don't have any street smarts about them. So they've got no experience. They've got no street smarts. They've got no, for want of a better term. And so they get out. They come through all of this. They graduate high school. They get into the elite programs as an adult, and suddenly it's all in front of them.
Yep.
And because they've never really been exposed to any of it, they can be easily led. They only have to get in with the wrong person and away they go.
Yeah, that's true.
We're off to the races. So we need to turn the pressure down. We need to stop putting astronomical amounts of pressure on these kids.
Do you think
we need to turn that down?
Do you think also, and this might sound, I'm not sure. I mean, I want to ask. This is why I wanted to ask your opinion, and this is also why I also sent you some statistics there last week as well. But because I know that you are very much an advocate for this here. You always keep saying to me that sport should always be free and all that sort of and all that there. Do you think that the cost of living as well, because that's going skyrocketing as well, and take a sport like cricket for example, where you got to buy we got to buy like a lot of other stuff there, like a bat, gloves, and all that sort of stuff there. Do you think that there also sort of adds a lot more pressure, not just to the person, but not just to the player, but to the entire family as a whole?
Yeah, it does. It does. Now, you take most families these days, very, very few families these days have one child. Most families have two.
Yep.
Some cases 3. So you decide your 3 kids are going to sign up for the local, local cricket club.
Yep.
In some cases, clubs will have discounts for the second and third child, fair enough. Mm-hmm. But you're still going to have to pay it a fair bit of money. That's fees. You've got the fees. So that puts pressure on.
Yep.
Okay, governments assist. Governments assist.
Yep.
Personally, I think all the junior sport should be free in this country. And I think it's doable. I think it can be done. I just don't think there's the will to do it from certain people.
How would it be doable? In which case there? I mean, sorry to butt in.
The first thing that's doable is that all local councils should not charge facility hire fees for junior sporting teams.
Okay.
And junior sporting clubs. That's the first thing that should be done. And there are a lot of councils out there, by the way, and a lot of them, the vast majority are on the East Coast, that don't. So it can be done. This is the point. If you've got the will, it can be done. But unfortunately, some people are just plain greedy, Kieran. That's just the reality.
But also in saying that as well, I mean, like part of like registration fees also comes, I mean, like a bit of money there goes to the club, but also stuff for like insurance as well. Stuff for like insurance.
That's another conversation. See,
and the associations.
I have a serious problem around what's being charged as part of registration fees. If you take a deeper dive, and I take a deeper dive into the sport of hockey, there are some aspects of the registration fees that really, quite frankly, don't need to be there. I think can be swallowed by administration bodies. I think could be swallowed by them. For example, there's a supposed development levy in place on all Hockey Australia participants. There's a development levy on their fee. Now, levy is supposed to go towards, what it says, development. I'd like to see I'd like the administration to tell me if it actually does. I doubt they would, because I don't think it. I know full well it probably doesn't.
So it's more along the lines. I mean, whilst I do, because we've had this conversation a number of times, and I don't know if I was going to get you back on, so I thought that's why I would bring it up, because you are a very big advocate for sport being free. I'm on the fence in the sense where obviously
there are certain elements.
I do believe that sport should be affordable for everyone, because I do think that, like if you pay, like take cricket, for example, you pay Rego, as I've said here numerous times on this episode, like you pay, have to pay like a bat, have to pay pads, gloves, inners, have to buy a cricket bag, and then if you have a brother or other siblings there, that's two bats, that's two sets of pads or three sets of pads and whatnot, and whatnot. So I definitely do agree in regards to lowering the prices just to make it more affordable, especially in the times that we are for cost of living. And I do agree that there should be some fees there. I mean that should be waived. I mean if there are like certain fees there to which you look at and you go, why are they there? I do think that they should waive those ones, but for ones like I believe like insurance and maybe a couple of others, like I think that they have to register to pay for their register to play in their association or something there. I'm not really too sure, but I definitely know for insurance, I think for insurance purposes that they should have to pay, but. I do agree that it should be at an affordable price, and whatnot, because of the entirety of the cost of living. So whilst I do agree with your stance there in the sense that sport should be attainable for everyone, because because you've said it to me tons of times there, it is a human right. And whatnot. I do agree with some of the premise there that some of the fees should be gone. If it's, for example, I'm not saying that this here, I'm just spitfiring out the back of my head and whatnot. There's stuff like administration fees and whatnot. I think there should be waived. But if it's main things like insurance, then yes, that there should be and other things like that, then yes, they should be part of the registration fees, and that just be it.
Well, insurance is something that you can't get around.
Yeah, of course.
So I agree with you on that. When I say I believe sport should be free for everybody, what I'm talking about is that's the utopian.
Yeah, of course.
Realistically, I know it's probably maybe not possible, but it's my ultimate belief that it could be. But I do believe that there are ways and means to address certain other things.
I do agree with that.
In terms of insurance, I will say this, in terms of insurance, I think we're going to see it. The insurance industry I think they need to be looked at, particularly in sport, particularly as well. They need to be looked at as to whether sport is getting bang for its buck with the insurance, or whether it's being charged for things that shouldn't be being charged for.
Yeah, I mean that's something there to which I do think that
that's a conversation, but that's a conversation.
Yeah, that's another conversation for another time. But yeah, I mean, I definitely do agree with that because
in terms of levies outside of that,
yep.
And I talk about things like a development levy. Then I believe that needs to be looked at. I don't believe that junior sport should have to fork out for, particularly parents should have to fork out for a development levy that pays for a brand new facility, which tends to be what happens. You know, here in West Australia, in my sport of hockey, they're going through a process. They're going to massively refurbish the Perth Hockey Stadium.
Yep.
It's really only utilised by a handful of a year. It's really only utilised by a small number of those that play hockey in Western Australia. But I have this sneaky suspicion that in order to pay for the development, somewhere along the line, there's going to be a levy tacked on everybody's fees.
Yep.
If there hasn't already. Why? Why should someone playing country hockey in Esperance, who never sees Perth Hockey Stadium, have to pay a levy for the refurbishment of a city facility?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do agree with that there, mate. And
so that there needs to be looked at. And I think the reason why it needs to be looked at is because, and I think it needs to be not looked at by the sporting bodies. I think it needs to be looked at by the government, by the Parliament. I think the Senate, through some sort of Senate inquiry, needs to have a bit of a closer look, because there is some stuff there that I think's, and I'm going to be controversial when I say here, I think there might be a bit of skullduggery going on.
Well, that there could be another conversation there for.
Well, yeah, I just think it needs to be looked at.
I definitely do agree.
In terms of equipment, we talked about equipment. There needs to be a bit of a closer look there, because you have to ask yourself, and I've seen this firsthand, you have to ask yourself, why does, if you go into a hockey shop and you buy a hockey stick for $150
yep.
or $160, why can you then go to a carnival, say here in West Australia, wherever, and go to the same hockey tent from the same hockey shop and see that at a massively discounted price of around $50 or $60? How can they reduce it that far? Up to 80%.
I think that's probably maybe because
that tells you just how much of a markup they're getting.
Yeah, I mean, because I do know a little bit of business, but we'd have to also just bring in a business expert to sort of talk about that there. I think it probably that they might be saying, look, at a hockey carnival, you know, we'll take the hit and we might be able to sell, or they might be, you know, at stock take and all that sort of stuff there. So
it does point out to you within the sports equipment side of things how much markup is occurring.
Yeah.
When you can go offshore in Australia, offshore from Australia, and go over to India and buy 100 cricket bats for the same as it would cost you to buy 4 here in Australia. You've got to start asking yourself, what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean that there. Yeah, I mean that there. Oh, wow, I mean that's that actually puts it into a whole new perspective.
Yeah, you got to ask yourself about that. You got to ask yourself. You got to pause. You got to have a look and think, hello, what's really going on here? You know, I once did an interesting scenario. I priced a number of hockey sticks, wooden hockey sticks in South Africa, and then compared them to Australia.
Yep.
For what it would cost me under the South African rand, okay, fair enough, the currency's not the same, but what I would pay in the South African rand, I could get more than what I could pay for under the Australian here in Australia.
Well, I mean that. Well, I mean that. There's something there which I do think that
It's
we.
another conversation that has to be looked. It's another thing that has to be looked at.
Yeah, I mean I definitely do agree because
No one's really looking at.
because like one of the things there to which I sent you in the statistics was like with the participation rates as well, you know, because like that's sort of um during um 2018 to 2022 they showed the participation rates and whatnot, but one of them was also due to also low socioeconomic areas, and they
Yeah.
were also then showing there that that people there with a lower income would only play like certain sports, like your swimming or or your running and athletic style type
We,
of
we
sports.
need we need to be asking ourselves why more and more Australians are changing the way they want to consume sport, and there needs to be a conversation. More and more, we're seeing more and more of a desire to play sports that are pick up and play.
Yep.
That's what they're after.
Yep. So I do think that there is something there to which like definitely needs to have a discussion, and I do think that cost of living might also have a bit to do with the likes of participation rates going and could also have an effect going forward because of things like what we were talking about there with the equipment, but also with the things like registration fees. Add into there, like with the likes of technology and all that there, and people probably might not want to sort of come back and play certain sports, or some people there might end up wanting to come back.
The other thing I will say about those participation rates, and I had a bit of a look at the stuff you sent me, I'm always a bit wary
Yes.
about those figures. And the reason I'm wary is because I know what clubs have got a habit of doing.
Yep.
And if they want to make sure that they look better than their rival
Oh
club,
yeah, of course.
they'll fudge figures.
Yeah, of course.
I know from experience that there are, and I've seen it, there are hockey clubs, there are, and I'm assuming this would go on in other sports too, they triple count or they double count a player. If a player is participating in 2 or 3 teams, they count them 3 times as 3 separate entities, 3 separate players. They're not 3 separate players, but they count them 3 different times. So, and they put that in the figures. So the figures to me I'm always a bit cautious of reading a bit too much into those figures. I think you've got to be careful, particularly because those figures are often done by the clubs themselves.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. I mean, like, I got my statistics from the Australian sports statistics where I sent you the links, and one of them also did say that children under 15 would be less likely to play sport if they do come from a low income families, and I do think that's
correct.
That's
some
something.
Some of that stuff is quite accurate.
Which I do think there is a bit of a detrimental effect because it's related to this topic there, because sure, look, sports in regards to a coaching aspect, or even in regards to just sort of like a participation or just from an education point of view, when you go and play sport, as you said there earlier, like they connect with everyone. I mean, like with new people, and that they get to go and play the sport. I think that if they're not given an opportunity to actually participate or be able to play and whatnot, it can also be another nail in the cycle of what's going on and what's affecting people of today and whatnot.
This comes back to the point is that what tends to happen, and this tends to be going on within sport now, the focus is often after a certain age, so after they turn 12.
Yep.
The sport tends to focus more on the elite end of it at the expense of the grassroots. Mm-hmm. And the grassroots gets left to fend for itself. The result of that is that they're dying and withering on the vine because they don't understand that the reason why the elite end of the sport can be so successful is because of the 95% grassroots that prop it up.
Okay.
I don't think the AFL's quite figured this out yet. I think they've got a reckoning that's coming pretty quickly if they're not careful. There's a few things they're doing at the moment which I think are going to bite the hand that feeds them, and they're going to pay for it.
So just quickly, because you just sort of brought something there into my head there. In regards to educators and in regards to coaches and whatnot. So obviously, you know, we've been talking about the participation rates at the start and whatnot, but how would sort of educators, these coaches, as a whole, try and find a way to sort of help because I know that you said they got to take the pressure off these kids, but like it's one thing to actually sort of see the pressure, but it's another thing to actually sort of go up and actually say to a parent or go up and actually say to them, I think you're being a bit too harsh on them or something like that.
Yeah, no, not an easy thing to do. Not easy. Not today. It's not easy to do today. It was far easier to do when I first started. Far easier to do. It's a hell of a lot harder to do today than it was back when I first started. I can tell you that right now.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely do agree with that. There. I mean, I think even, I definitely do think even in my time back when I used to play and even when I used to coach as well, you know, it would have been a lot more easier. But also it is a lot more harder as well. And I think it's also very, very hard to want to have a conversation like, for example, that something might be, I'm not going to say wrong, but there might be something going on with their child or something there that they need to have a look at.
The way I go about it, and I've done this because I've done this within hockey, the way I go about it, and this is very important to remember, is I make the point. Right.
Yep.
I make the point to them. I say, right, there is your son or daughter wants to be Kookaburra or Hockey Roo. Okay.
Yep.
The pathway to that is you've got to go through and get into one of the one league franchises.
Yep.
From each state. They've got about 16 players in their squad, 16 to 18 players in their squad. Okay. There's seven of those teams around the country, maybe about to be 8. They've each got 16 to 18 players in their squad. So how many? I say to them, so how many is that overall? And I say to them, calculate those figures. How many is that? And they'll go through and they'll have a look at it. And I say, right, 16 to 18, you've got 7 teams. You've got 112 players at the elite level playing hockey in the one league. From that 112 players, they then pick an Australian squad of around 25. Of which they'll then take 16 to 18 to an Olympics or a Commonwealth Games. What do you think the odds are of your son or daughter being one of them? And that's the point I make, is I bring it back to the figures. I bring it back to the reality. I don't make it directly about their son and daughter. I say, what do you think the odds are? And say to them, look, you need to understand, if they really want to do this, it's not easy. It's not easy. So think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do agree with that. I mean, I think that they need.
Don't land them, put them under huge amounts of pressure to achieve it, knowing full well they're probably not going to.
Yeah,
probably not going to.
I definitely do. I definitely do agree with that, there, mate. Because I mean, like as we've been talking about throughout this whole podcast episode, is that there are numerous factors from grassroots coaching that they need to look at. But I do think that that overall, I do think that parents, they do have that sort of responsibility, and it is very hard because it's, as a coach, you're not their parent. I mean, like
No, not their parents, but
you're not the kid's parent. You're just there to teach them and how to play a certain sport. Like you shouldn't, butt into the way how they do their parenting styles and whatnot. And you should respect that. But I do think that there might be a bit of time there where, like, especially if it's your team, or if it's your classroom, go from a educator's perspective, that as long as the coach or the educator is happy with the results, or how they're progressing, then I think that that's really all that should really matter.
And that's right. At the end of the day, one of the things I think at the end of the day we always need to come back to, and this is important, is that sport should be there, particularly in the teenage years, for them to have fun and participate and enjoy. They should be able to go. It should be, in most cases, a sanctuary from everything else that's going on in their life. They should be able to go and play sport without having to worry about, exams, or without having to worry about all that stuff. They have to worry about that anyway.
Yep.
And that's another story. My views on some of that stuff. But it needs to be about, I think the focus needs to get back to being about enjoying it, having fun, participating, and then let the child decide, let the kid decide, let the team decide what they want. If they want to go on and be a top-class footballer, or a top-class soccer player, or a top-class hockey player, or a top-class rugby league player, whatever, let them make that call.
Yep.
It's not up to the parent. Let them make the call. It's not up to the coach. Let them make the call. I'll give you the example. I chose not to pursue a career as in cricket. Why? Because I knew I couldn't. I knew it wouldn't give me a living.
Yep.
So I chose the teacher's pathway. But it was my choice.
Yep.
It wasn't my parents', it was mine. We need to get back to allowing the kids to make the call. Unfortunately, there are some parents, and you're always going to get this.
Yep.
You're always going to get this. Parents are living vicariously through the kid. The kid's really good at, say, for example, the round ball game, football, so suddenly the parents' eyes light up.
Yep.
The possibility of their child becoming a huge star on the international stage playing in Europe. What are the odds of that? Then you've got to come back and say, well, what are the odds of that actually happening? So this is the issue. So we've got to get back to it being about enjoyment, about fun. I think some of the way to achieve that is to stop having state teams younger than maybe 13, 14 years of age. Yep. I think it's ridiculous that we have state teams selected at 11, 12. I think that's too young. I think it's ridiculous. I think 13, 14, and even then I think that might be just slightly a bit too young too. I think you can monitor and identify a young kid with talent through those early years. You don't need them to be in a talent pathway. You don't need all that sort of palaver that goes with it. I think there's ways and means to achieve it. So the thing is, Kieran, as I always say, there's ways and means to achieve it, and I believe there is. Unfortunately, administrators running these sports don't have the will nor the desire to do it.
So just one question. Sorry, if there might be a bit of a lag or anything, but just a question quickly before we head into the final part of the podcast and whatnot. Going forward then, because obviously we've been talking about the differences between the generations, between the start, because things like social media, how there really wasn't any back when you started coaching, and as well as also with the cost of living now, now as well being a major effect and whatnot. How do particularly, as well as also with educators as well, because you've also got a teaching degree, but more so from a coaching perspective. Going forward, then, how do what other sort of things do coaches need to also sort of look out for going forward? Because we are starting to evolve. We are going to be evolving. Honestly, who would have thought artificial intelligence would have been coming through now in 2023, and it happened, I think, in around the early 2000s. Like the early 2020s or the late 2010s and whatnot. So we're now heading into that sort of era. What sort of things there going forward that coaches need to, or educators just need to be a little bit aware of when it comes to coaching their players and watching out for their players going forward?
Coaches, and I've said this repeatedly, coaches going forward need to be good listeners.
Yep.
They needed to be good listeners before that. They definitely need to be good listeners now. They need to listen. When a kid comes over to them at training and is talking to them, don't talk back at them.
Okay.
Just listen. Because they'll probably tell you something that might be quite a clue as to what's going on. I think coaches need to be aware that they have a responsibility to turn the pressure down. Don't put pressure on where pressure doesn't need to be. Mm-hmm. Relax. Don't stress yourself as a coach. I think you've heard other coaches say this. I think we've heard other people say this. And I'll say this again. Always remember, is this a hill I want to die on? Does it really matter that much?
Yep.
I think coaches need to create an environment where the kids feel safe. They feel confident in themselves. They feel that they can come and have fun and enjoy themselves. I think that's what it's got to be. Coaches have got to set that environment up. Not just kids, at all levels. Even coaches that coach seniors need to create an environment where, it's safe, friendly, inclusive, everyone's participating, everyone's being a part of it. People are having fun and they're enjoying it. If they do that, they'll play well, automatically.
Yeah, that's true.
Every team I've coached to success, the biggest part of that success has been they're having fun, they're enjoying themselves. The result of them having fun and enjoying themselves, they play well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that there.
Every single premiership success that's come my way, that's been the one, and the sole underlying thing that sat there amongst it. So I think that's what's got to happen.
So what more do we, because obviously we're going to be constantly evolving. What do you think is next on the horizon that we need to sort of almost prepare ourselves for going forward?
Well, AI obviously is speeding up. There's going to be scenarios coming out soon enough where coaches actually physically won't need to be in the location to coach.
Okay.
Or they'll hologram or something of them. They'll be in a studio somewhere doing all stuff, but essentially they'll be in the middle of, say, for example, I'm in a studio, doing what I do, but I'm actually in the middle of coaching a team at a hockey turf somewhere on the other side of the world. That will occur. That's an inevitability. It'll happen. How that will actually work, I don't know, because I think that could lead to some disengagement issues between coaches and players. I think that could be rather interesting. Mm-hmm. I think the biggest thing we need to remember is we can't put genies back in bottles. Genies are out. That's it. Game over. We're not going to be able to change that.
Yep.
But we've got to be aware that those things that are causing issues, that have been causing issues, are not going away.
Yep.
They're going to remain. And we just have to be on top of it.
Yeah, I definitely do agree with that.
And I come back to the point. Coaching accreditation needs to be about more than just getting them in, getting them to pay a fee. And this is to the sports. This is the sports that have to do this. the administrative of the sports. It needs to be more than about getting them in, getting them to pay a fee, and then chucking them out the other end with a few skills of how to coach the sport. It needs to be about making sure, for starters, that they actually can coach, not just the sport, but can coach, can engage, do know how to talk to people.
Yep.
That's a big problem. They don't. A lot of the coaches out there, and I'll never denigrate a coach, but a lot of the coaches out there do have trouble engaging. I've seen it.
Yep.
Being able to do it. So that's something that needs to be aware of. Coaching accreditation needs to be more than about simply about the sport. The other thing too is it needs to be treated as a profession. We need to start treating coaches as a profession, same as we treat teachers, educators. We need to treat all those, and in turn, we need to pay them accordingly.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
We pay them accordingly. We don't pay teachers anywhere near enough money than we should do. I don't see what the difference. I actually think a teacher's worth more money than, let's face it. I think a teacher's worth more money than, should be getting more money than a politician. But
well, there's a discussion there for another.
I think a teacher probably should be getting more money than some of these big wig CEOs of these companies, these multi-conglomerate companies too.
Yeah, I definitely do agree in the fact that teachers need to be well compensated because because the teachers that I went to school with and who taught me, they were very good to me. So yeah, I definitely do agree with that.
We just need to understand that teachers and coaches, particularly, and this is the thing, coaches are treated. It's treated as an amateur thing. It's treated it's a volunteer thing. No. You become a coach. It's a professional thing you do, and every coach needs to be treated that way. I heard something the other day which I thought was ridiculous. I didn't realise this, but Netball Australia doesn't have a coaches association.
Oh wow!
It's not the only sport. By you, it's not the only sport in Australia where that's occurring too. By the way.
Yeah, there's something there to which. Wow, that's actually quite surprising, but that's actually something there to which we could actually discuss a little bit later.
I know, but and it's another conversation. But that I'm just saying that.
Yeah, of course.
Let's understand that our coaches are professional in what they do. In turn, they need to be treated that way. In turn, they need to be shown the respect in that way. In turn, they need to be, if they're earning money from coaching, in turn, they need to be paid accordingly. Not all coaches get paid. We get that.
Yep.
But even those volunteers still need to be
compensated.
Need to be properly compensated.
Yep.
They need to be properly supported, and it's up to clubs to properly support them. It's. For example, this is one thing that all clubs should do. Any club that's got a coach that goes through an accreditation process, whether it be level 1, level 2, level 3, whatever it is, the club should be wearing the cost to get them accredited. They shouldn't be expecting the coach to fork out that money. They should be paying for that. Why? They're investing in somebody.
Mm.
They're investing in capital. That coach, they're investing in them. They should be investing in them. Don't expect that coach to go off and most coaches do. We go off and invest in our own, the good ones. We go off and invest in our own, but clubs should be doing that. So those are a couple of things going forward that I think have to be looked at. And I think the whole accreditation system has to be looked at going forward. Don't just give them, it's not just about whether they can coach the sport. They need to have resources at their hands where they can deal with, because they're going to be dealing with this, they can understand what's happening in the area of mental health. They understand what's happening in the area of psychology. Yep. And they understand what could come their way and how to deal with it. When I first had to deal with a situation with one of my young players who had an eating disorder, it was confronting. But luckily enough, I had some experience with training to be able to handle it.
And luckily that you did there, mate.
Yeah, I can imagine a novice coach with none.
Oh, I could imagine a novice coach not wanting to. I don't even think a novice coach would potentially would even have that conversation or know how to have that conversation. So
Now, at the
it
time,
is. So it
I,
is.
I
Sorry.
wrote to all ministers about that, sports ministers about that, and got basically ignored. So that shows you where they're at. So I think we need to address those issues going forward. We need to make sure that, because this is an argument I've been having about the school system, we need to make sure things are fit for purpose still.
Yep.
I thought when the pandemic occurred, the pandemic would be the circuit breaker.
Yep.
Make everyone realise, oh, cripes, we've got to change.
Yep.
Unfortunately, I'm a bit concerned it didn't. And the reason I'm concerned it didn't is because you go back and look at history. When the Spanish flu was rife in after the Second World War, and then around 1920, 21, the Spanish flu finally ran its course. We went off on the roaring 20s after that.
Yep.
And, everything roared away. The result of what happened at the end of the 20s? We had a depression.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that is true. But yeah, I mean, I definitely do agree there that
it's another conversation.
Yeah.
I'm just a bit concerned that we didn't see that as an opportunity to break as a circuit breaker in certain things, and we're just letting it roar away again.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do agree with that.
The result of letting it roar away again is we're going to wake up one day oh, geez, we're in trouble. We're in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, mate. I mean, that's one thing there to what you don't want to do. But one final question before the end is, the question is seems though that it's now getting towards the wrap-up time, what is the question to what you want to ask my next guest?
Wow. I had a bit of a thought about this when you sent this through, and I was thinking, what do I want to ask the next guest? And I guess I wanted to ask the next guest, a very pointed question, but a very simple question.
Shoot.
If you had an opportunity to run sport globally for a day.
Yep.
What is the one thing you would you change?
Oh,
you'd
wow.
Do,
oh, wow. That's a
What's
big...
the one thing you do?
Okay.
Whether it be your sport or whether it be sport in general, what's the one thing you'd change or do differently or introduce?
Oh, that's a very big one. That's a very big one. You got me thinking there about it there, mate. But I'll have to think about that there as well for when I do my next guest for the next episode on the podcast. That's actually a very good question there, mate. But Jerome, thanks again for agreeing to come on the podcast. Certainly going to have you on again and whatnot. Might even try and see if I can have multiple guests on at a time and maybe talk about certain topics and maybe have like a debate or something. But that might be. But we'll see how that goes. But again, Jerome, thanks again for agreeing to come on. And yeah, it was a pleasure. It was very insightful. I do believe having a chat about it here. I mean, especially with certain aspects of coaching, especially at a grassroots level, in compared to back when you started coaching to now, it was very good and it was very insightful. And yeah, I mean, I definitely did learn something. And I also I think the one thing there what I will take away from is that being able to listen is something that what I think there when you're teaching or coaching, being able to try and listen. And
I'll leave you with this. I'll leave you with two things, but I'll leave you with these two things.
Yep.
My late grandma said this to me, and I say this to others. Open your ears, shut your mouth, and listen.
Well, that's a very that there, Jerome, is a very good is actually very.
And the second thing is The second thing is coaching, like life, is a journey.
Yep.
You move into different phases as you go. There's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be bumps. They do flatten out over time.
Mm-hmm.
They're still there. Enjoy it. Ride those bumps. Don't worry so much about when things don't quite go the way you wanted to go. Some will go the way you wanted to go, just around the corner. And enjoy it. Enjoy it. I'm not finished with my journey yet. Sometimes it's a long one, sometimes it's a short one, but I'm not finished with mine yet.
Yeah,
just enjoy it.
That's the spirit there, Jerome. And thanks again for agreeing to come on. And I'll definitely have you on next time. Sometime later on, I'll have you on again, hopefully. And thanks again for agreeing to come on. And that's all there, folks. And I'll see you all in the next episode.